When you talk to anybody off the record, the players, some of the assistants at Georgia, and you ask them not necessarily the secret to their success, but what is one of the most important things, it's not always off the record either. A lot of times, guys talk about this on the record. It's how difficult the practices are at Georgia. And that's one of the things that I caught over the weekend during the combine in Indianapolis was that Georgia's players obviously had a good week in Indy. And it's one of those things where, you know, they've all built towards that moment. But I don't know which guy it was that said, could you imagine what the practices are like? Yeah, I can. I mean, I see the practices sometimes. I hear Kirby. You know, you the battles that George is having in the middle of practice with even I guess the ones versus the scout team, but definitely the ones versus the twos. That's a real deal fight right there. I mean, think about good on good. Think about one on twos now, not ones on ones. You'd be talking about Broderick Jones as a two at left tackle going up against Georgia's number one defense a lot. Not the whole year, but a lot. Broderick Jones ended up being the left tackle for Georgia at the end of the most important game of the season for Georgia. That's how tough practices can be. You've got guys like Keely Ringo, who's going against, not the whole year, but George Pickens, um, you know, Arian Smith, whoever, and that's just Keely. On the other side, you've got Kendrick. That's what the practices have been like. Now, going on in the future, it might not always be that way, but it probably will be for some time because a lot of the guys that are in this book, DAWGSTRUCTION, you can get this book by clicking down below. A lot of guys in this book chronicling the national championship for Georgia are a product of what it's been like over the last uh, you know 4 seasons for them. This is something I wrote about a dog post. The program at Georgia is finally at a mature level. And what I mean by that is the program has everything that Kirby's asked for. No longer are they trying to build the indoor practice facility. Well, obviously they got that the year he was there. No longer are they building the recruiting facility at the edge of Sanford Stadium. They already got that. That's been built. The practice facility at Georgia, off Lumpkin, right in the middle of campus. They don't need to build that again. It's already built. Georgia's not now where it was 5 years ago when Kirby took over. It's a different program because everything's come together. All of the moving little parts that you needed to have a moment like this, they came together, and the practices can be vicious, can be I mean, they're definitely tougher than the game. Whenever you talk with folks off the record, behind the scenes, on background, however you want to call it, they'll tell you, the practices are tougher than the games, and they want it that way. What you don't want is, Kirby on the mic getting after you, and kind of, I mean, embarrassing you is my way of putting it, but it's really just coaching. And that's where Georgia's at right now. They're taking their, schools of highly recruited kids, scores, not schools, and they are maneuvering them to the best possible outcome. That happens during practice. That happens when Channing Tindall is toiling away. I mean, you think about the two guys that have played quarterback at Georgia and started really all three starters the last 2 years at Georgia. Both of the meaningful guys, Stetson Bennett and JT Daniels, spent considerable amount of time on the scout team practicing against the number one defense at Georgia. Now, do you think that there's been a better defense that this team has faced as a scout team quarterback than the number one Georgia defense, one of the best defenses of all time? I can't imagine you'd have a more difficult challenge than going up against those guys with scout teamers playing for you. That's who you're equipped with. We're having a hard time kind of getting the ball off. That's what JT and Stetson were dealing with. That's what I can't imagine that it's more difficult. At Alabama, yeah, that was tough. I think that was a challenging environment for Stetson. I think that was a challenging environment for the team. But that was with a quarter of the audience there. I mean, I can't. I think the toughest situation Georgia's offense has been in over the last few years has been in practice. I mean, consistently, that's definitely true. And then at Alabama, yeah, no question, but their defense wasn't as good as Georgia's defense. No, and you can't really compare. um, had Georgia been going up to Bryant Denny with 100,000 people screaming down at them, that would have been tougher. Yeah, but they didn't experience that. And the Auburn game this past year, I write about this in the book, talking about the Auburn game. That really was an important moment in the season. That was the moment where JT Daniels might not be coming back. And it was something that they warned about, the noise of 87,000 fans that Jordan Hare would bring, the likes of which Georgia's players had not seen since surviving there 21-14 2 years before, would be a deafening crowd. On the field, it was evident that number two dogs were experiencing something they had not faced in quite some time: noise in an unfriendly environment. That's something they didn't deal with a lot, and something Georgia doesn't deal with a ton either. So in that scenario, Georgia's offense had to go up against a defense that's not as good as the one that they face in August and fall camp, and a lot of times in spring ball. But in terms of the players, no, not the same at all. That's why the practices are really critical to the success of this program. They're critical to the success of any program. When you get the book, one thing we talk about in there is the practices leading up to the national championship and the Orange Bowl. They weren't the greatest practices Georgia had all season. In fact, I talk about practice actually not an insignificant amount in the book, because you could tell there was a problem, if you want to call it that, at the Charleston Southern week when Kirby was talking about how they weren't practicing well. Like they weren't practicing the way they needed to get where they had to go. During practices, as a person who's suffered through more than my fair share, during practice, it is easy to let your mind wander. I mean, you're thinking about a lot of different stuff. The challenge is for the coaches to make sure that if you're not in the right place, that you get to the right place. I've talked about this a lot through the years. Any one person out of practice can make it better. They can immediately snap off and do something, and that gets the attention of the entire team. With that said, too, one person can make it worse as well. And that's the thing about, I'm looking at Keeley right now on the book cover. You're looking at Nolan on the book cover. Any one person, and it can be the coach too. It can be, Kirby doesn't always have great days, right? I mean, he's human. So, what's the person's motivation that day at practice is so critical to the success of a team. Practice is basically work. You're trying to figure things out. And if it's challenging, that means when you eventually figure it out, it makes practice all the more meaningful and all the better. It's the key to the program at Georgia. I'm telling you, it is absolutely critical. Every practice doesn't have to be perfect. And in fact, they usually are not. But as long as you're building towards something, that's really the most important thing. Think about it this way. What if Stetson Bennett had not had good practices running up to the UAB game? What if um, Brock Bowers? What if Broderick Jones, specifically, just Broderick Jones? What if Broderick had not prepared himself for the moment that he found himself in, which was playing left tackle on the critical drives of the national championship game? That's why practices matter. That's why going up against Nolan, that's why going up against Trayvon Walker and Devontae, that's what got Broderick Jones ready for his moment. And if he had not had that opportunity because of the players that were there, he wouldn't have been able to succeed. Hey, check out DAWGSTRUCTION below. We'll see you on the website.